So in this video I'm going to be experimenting to see if I can demonstrate whether or not Caddx Ascent is a diversity system or whether it works more akin to its older sibling Avatar. Now with Avatar, the goggles, VRX, etc. had 4 antennas. One antenna transmitted from the goggles back to the VTX, while the other 3 received information and listened to the VTX. Digital, like walk snail systems and DJI, are a two-way digital system. The goggles need to listen for the video coming from the VTX, but it also needs to be able to talk back to the VTX to let it know whether or not it actually received that information. With Ascent, we only have 2 antennas, so the reasonable question is one of those antennas a transmit while the other one is a receiving antenna, or do both of them send and receive? And I hope in this video that we can try and demonstrate to see whether or not what's going on. So I have the whoop in the garden, I've set it to 25 milliwatts, and I'm turning the debug information on. And the information that we need to be watching on this debug information is just up here, these 2 number 48s. Each one of these numbers represents the minus dBm of each antenna on the VRX. And what's basically going to happen here is my son is beside me, and periodically I ask him to cover the left antenna or the right antenna or both antennas with his hand. And as he does that, we should see these numbers change. So I've armed the quad and we're letting it sit beside, and we can see that the baseline number is that mid to high 40s. I then ask him to cover one antenna, and we can see how one immediately jumps in number. Nothing really happens to the bit rate or anything like that because we're so close. You can see now that he's swapped the other, and now he's got his hands covering both. So this is the kind of pattern that we're going to see when I take off and fly further up the garden. And we'll be taking off in just a second. So we'll see these numbers rise and fall depending on which one he has his hands covering. So here we go. So yes, set the quad to 25 milliwatts, and I'm flying up in behind this tree, and I'll just be orbiting here. So the baseline for this area is kind of mid 70s, and we can see just here that the bit rate is still holding at around 20 megabits per second. As I then start to orbit, he then covers up one antenna, and we can see that we have a 98 versus an 88. So he's covering this antenna, and the bit rate has dropped. And we just orbit round. We can see that one antenna is significantly higher than the other. He's now swapped. This one has decreased and this one has increased, and the bit rate is still very low. And it will fluctuate as I orbit this and the antenna orientation changes. We can see there he had his hands off both for a little second or two, but then he swapped it back. And now he's got his hands over both. Both of those numbers jumped up significantly there. There we go. And the bit rate has plummeted and the image has gone all stuttery. So we've completely lost signal. Let's just watch that again. Okay, here we go. So our baseline is kind of 70s to 80s. As I start to orbit, he covers up one side. The image quality decreases slightly, the bitrate drops, but it's fine, still usable. He's then swapped, and in terms of image quality, nothing really has changed too much. He's then taken his hands off both, and everything comes back briefly. We've seen about 12 megabits per second for a second there as he had both hands off the antenna. His hands gone back onto the other side, and now his hands are on both, and the image has started to stutter and the bitrate has plummeted. So what does that tell us? So let's recap there. So when both antennae were completely clear, the bitrate was good and the image was flowing nicely. As he then covered up one antenna, the bitrate dropped, the image quality dropped, but it was still flyable. Then when he swapped covering the other antenna, the image remained blocky and the bitrate remained low. Then when he covered his hand over both antennas, it really got blocky and the bitrate really dropped. So for me, what that suggests is both of the antenna are sending and receiving information, and they're both combining what they receive to display what we see. So it's diversity in a sense, but it's not true diversity like you would have with an analog system. But it certainly has more redundancy built into it compared to Avatar. With Avatar, if you cover that TX antenna, the whole system shuts down, even if you leave the 3 receiving antenna uncovered. Where at least here, if one of your antennas gets covered, the other antenna is able to pick up the slack and still give you an image that's reduced in quality, but still a usable image. But if you lose both antenna, that's when the system will shut down. So I think that kind of clears it up, at least I hope. I'm not an RF expert. I'm just doing these little experiments and coming up with conclusions. Let me know if what you see here, you come up with a similar conclusion. Okie doke, until the next one.